And welcome guys once again. In the last video, what we did was to set up our React application and our Laravel application and installed all the dependencies and packages we were going to use for the both of them. So in this video, we're going to be looking at creating the login and the registration API for our Laravel 6.0 application. So what I like to do first of all is to create a new controller, and Ctrl+ backtick gets us a terminal on Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to say php artisan make controller, and we want our controller to sit inside a folder called user, and basically in this user folder, that's where our auth controller is going to be, as well as our contacts controller. Basically the controller is going to manage all the contact API contact endpoints. So we're going to call this auth controller, and now php artisan make controller. So yep, it has scaffolded for us our auth controller right here. So our auth controller right here. So what we can do here now is to get our constructor. So we're going to say public function construct, and we want to import our models. So let's just import all the packages we are going to be using for this application first of all. Sorry, for this controller first of all. So we're going to need our model, user model, and user, and then we are also going to need JWT auth. So yep, we're going to need JWT auth too from the time on JWT package, and we're going to need validator. So validator, yep, not time on JWT validator, sorry, I mean Laravel validator, sorry. All right, not you, let's see. Yep. All right, and aside from just validator, we are also going to need our hash facade, and sorry for this, it's just JWT auth, and we're going to need a hash facade basically for hashing our passwords. So hash eliminate support facade, yes, and we are also going to need JWT exception. So JWT exception, and this is going to come from time on JWT auth exceptions, JWT exceptions. Okay, so that's just about that for what we will need for now. So what I'm going to do next is right here, okay, I'm going to create a variable up here, and I'll call that user. This is going to be protected, and I'll call this user, and I'm going to use the user model. Okay, and so we're going to write our first function, which would be to register the user. All right guys, and now in this in registering a user, there are some basic things that we need in our application: the first name, the last name, the email, the password, and the user image to be uploaded, which is actually optional. But when a user is being registered, oh sorry, I'm actually talking about when we are adding a contact. When the user is being registered, all we just need is the first name, the last name, the email, and the password. All right, so we're gonna say validator. So first of all, we need to validate the user credentials. So I'm gonna say validator, and we want to validate a couple of things. So basically we're going to get all the requests that is coming, and now here comes what we what we want to validate. But before I validate that, let me actually add that here in our function. And now we need to validate for the first name, and for that we'll just need it to be required, and it should be a string. And then same goes to the last name. It should be required, and it should also be a string too. And then the email, this should also be required as well as be a string. And then the last of them all is the password, and this is also going to be required and also going to be a string. And lastly is that it's going to be minimum length of 6 characters. All right, and let's just put a semicolon here, and now we'll say if the validator, all right, if it fails, basically if maybe one of the credentials entered, maybe the name, the email, or maybe one of the credentials is either blank, or maybe the email is not a type of email. Sorry, we made a mistake here. This is not supposed to be a string. This is actually supposed to be a type of email. So let's say the email is empty, or it's not an email, or maybe the password is less than 6 characters. Then we're going to return a response to the user, of course a JSON response, and our response is going to carry a couple of things, couple of objects. The first is going to be success, which is false, and then the next would be the message, and our message will simply be the message coming from the validator. So validator messages, and we want this to be passed, that's moved as an array to array. All right, so now if the validator fails, we want to show the user that. Now if the validator does not fail, which basically means that all credentials entered by the user are correct, and we just want to make this 400 response. All right, so that it returns a response header of 400. And what we can now do is we can now check the email. If this email has been registered before, then we can then tell the user that this email is registered. So we're going to use the user model, and we're going to say where email. All right, so where email is request email, and of course the request email is this email here. The email that's coming from this request that is sent from our React application down to our Laravel API. So what we want to do is we want to count. We want to say check the number of check if this email already exists. And now we're going to say if check email not equal, or basically if it is greater than 0. All right, if it's greater than 0, that means this is actually exist. So we want to return a response, and the response is going to be a JSON response, and the JSON response is going to have a 400, or should we do that? Yep, a 400. Oh no, let's just let it be this way. Let's return a 200 error response. That means it actually went, but a couple of things were not met. So what we can do here now is to say success is false, and the message is going to be saying this email is already taken, right? This email already exists. Please try another email. And once we have checked that, once we have actually checked this now, then we can now go ahead and create this new user. So we say this user, and we're going to use the create function that comes ahead with what is it called again? Let me go to user model, and sort of like say mass assignment kind of. All right, so in our user model we only have name, email, password. So let's just change that so that it would allow us to be able to use this create function. If not, we'll have to be mapping it one after the other. So let me come here. Yep, yeah, fill is called fill. So once we have once we are able to assign these things to the fill, it will enable us to be able to use this create function. So we have first name, last name, email, and password. So this is the name. We want to call this first name, if I am correct. And we want to email, password, and last name. So first name, email, password, and last name. So we've added that to the fillable. So now we can head straight back and use this create function, and we can then map our first name, Our first name will be mapped to our request and first name. All right. Our last name will be mapped to our request last name. Will be mapped to our request last name. Our email will be mapped to our request email. And our password will be mapped to our request password. All right. So now once this is done successfully, I'm going to just put a semicolon right here. So once we're done successfully creating a user, what we can then do is we want to be able to send the token and then redirect the user into his dashboard. And so to be able to do that, what we can do here is we can pass this in a variable and say register complete. All right. And then we can now say if register complete, basically if the action was successful, then we are going to pass this request object to a function called login. And also having in mind that this request object contains the user email and the user password, which we just registered. So if register complete, we want to call this function. And in the login function, that's where we are actually going to generate the token and all that. So let's just create that login function now. So public function login, and this is going to pass the request object. And in our login functionality, we are going to be requesting only two parameters, just the user email and the user password. So we're going to say validator. So first we want to validate to see for ourselves the two parameters. And we are then now going to say, just to be able to validate for only unique, for just only very few parameters, we can use request only. So we need just the email and we need the password too. And we are now going to validate it right here by the email. Let me not go into too much typing. Let's just come over here and copy the validation for the email and for the password here. All right, and paste that in here. And let's also go back to the validator failing and the response that we get. So if the validator fails, basically maybe the email is an invalid email, maybe the email is not up to so, or maybe the password does not meet so numbers, we can then return a response that says blah 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 error message. And once that is sure, the next thing we can do is we would need the JWT token, so we can set this initially to be null. And what we can now do here is to store this email and the password inside the variable that we'll call input. So we're also going to use request only, just the email and the password, because this would help us in generating our token. All right, so our input is just carrying just the email and the password. So now we can now check to see if this user actually is the user. So if we are going to be attempting, if this is not all right, so we're going to be attempting to get the user. Did I call this user? Let me be sure. Let me go to auth.php. All right, so I called it users. So I actually wanted to point out something here. See, our guard here is users. So if we are to be using, all right, so you can see it right here. It says function auth guard, get the available auth instance. So get the available auth instance. So this actually comes with, let me do that again. And now let me scroll down here. You can see that this is coming from stateful guard, and you actually pass the exact guard inside of the auth function. So, and our guard is the user's guard. So we are going to be using a function here called attempt. And what this function is going to be doing is, it is basically going to check whether this username or password is correct. That's basically whether this is the user, all right? So what we are simply saying is, we want to attempt to see whether this email and this password is correct. And remember that JWT token at this stage is actually set to null. So now if we have checked that, then we can now return a response. But I also want you to take note of something here. If this email and this password is correct, then it will pass the token directly into this JWT token here. All right, but if the email and the password is not correct, the JWT token will still be null. All right, so now what we can now do is we will now return a response, and our response is going to be a JSON response. All right, and our JSON response would be false. Of course, the reason why it will be false is because we are first of all checking if the JWT token is null, which means that the email and the password are correct. Because if email and password are correct, JWT_token will not remain as null. All right, so we are going to say success false, and the message is going to be invalid email or password. Invalid email or password. All right, so once we have been able to return this message of false and invalid email or password, we can then go straight to return our response. Of course, if it's true, the token value will be stored inside of this JWT token. So we can now return our response, our JSON response, which would take a couple of parameters. The first parameter would be success, which is true. The second parameter is going to be our token, and that should pass our JWT token. So we're going to pass our JWT token. So here we have our model. So what I want to do now is, let me go back to our Auth controller. And what I am going to do now is I am going to perform our migrations. But before I do that, I'd like us to basically create a new database, as we have not done that. So now to create our new database, we'd have to go to our browser. And we just type phpMyAdmin and root, and I'm going to enter my password. And now go. Okay, so now we are logged in. We're going to create a new database, and we're going to call this contact. We have a lot of contact managers here. Let's just call it contact manager. Contact manager tut or tutorial, something like that. So I'd like to just copy this name because we are still going to use that. So now it has created contact manager tutorial for us. So let us head back into our .env file, and what we want to do here is to get the database name here, and username root database. Oh, sorry, database is supposed to be this, and our password is if I can remember this long number I used. Yep, yes, this is usually all right. So yep, that's our password, and our username is set. So we have set up what we need to set up in our .env file. And now let me just do something, which is in our migrations. Sorry, let me just be sure. Anyway, there's no need about it. This is the PHP. No. But before we actually do these migrations, we will need to go to our user migration. So create user stable, and right in here we want to make a couple of changes. Else, if we don't do this and we perform the migrations, we're not going to have the exact table we want. So we want to add first name here, and we want to add last name to our users migration class. So first name, last name, email, password, and that should be just about what we need. First name, last name, email, password. So let me just be sure. Let's scroll up here, and first name, last name, email, password. And I just saw something here. In the password, we are supposed to hash this password. So we're going to use the hash and use the make on it. So hash make, and then this is going to hash our password for us. All right, so we just put in that semicolon, oh sorry, comma, since this is an object, since it's an array, sorry. So now here we can then say php artisan migrate, and now it has created our users table. Create field jobs table. No, that's not our. So now it has created our users table. So if I go here and I click on this, okay, this is our field jobs table. So, but that's not my interest. My interest is actually our users table, which is as created for us, and our password reset table. which we're not going to be using in this tutorial, by the way. All right, so having created that, let me just close my PowerShell terminal, and I'll just save this. And what I'm going to do now is to test our API, which we have actually built, and that will bring me to using Postman. So we're going to test our API. So Postman, and let's just do PHP artisan serve for this application, so that we can assign a port to it. So PHP artisan serve. All right, and now Postman is set. So what we want to do now is we will just create a new folder here and call this contact manager tutorial, and this is the description. This is the contact manager tutorial. And now let's just click on the create button, and that actually creates this folder for us. So let's create a new request by going to the add request and clicking on the add request. So we want to add a new request name, and let's give this a description. Say register request, and request name register user, and want to add this to contact manager. Save that. And now this is going to be a post request. Oh boy, sorry, we actually forgot to add routes for our application. So what we will do now is just go to API route, and in our API route we are going to get rid of this, and now we are going to create a new route. So we want to group all our routes under a prefix of user. And the namespace is also going to be user, because that is where our application is located in. Let me just show you what I mean here, the namespace user. All right, so, and having done that, the next thing we also want to do here is a function, and that function is going to basically handle our routes. So the first is going to be a post request, and this is going to be our register route, and everything is going to come from auth controller inside of our user namespace or user folder, and the function is called register. So let me just be sure that it is called auth controller. So let me scroll up a bit, and yep, you can see here that it's called auth controller. So let's just, now when we get that right here, so register, and now we can also do the same for the login, and this is also going to have auth controller at login. All right, so we have our register and our login route set up perfectly, and we give it a prefix of user, and then we give it a namespace of user too. Okay, so one more thing which I just remembered now, and I actually forgot to do, because if we try to connect to this API, it's going to throw an error, right, telling us things like it's going to throw a cause error. So what I'll want to do here now is we will create a new middleware, PHP artisan make middleware, and we're going to call this middleware cause. So this middleware is going to handle our cause operation. So sorry, so now let's just head straight over to the middleware cause.php, and right in here we're going to set a couple of HTTP headers. So we are going to set the first header, access control, allow origin, access control, allow origin, and we're just basically going to allow from all sources, and then we're going to set the next header, allow methods. So we're going to allow all methods, post, get, put, and all the methods. Allow methods, put get post patch, let's just delete, and options, and patch, right? All right, and we're going to set another header too. So this is going to be the allowed headers. And this would allow us to be able to set origin, content type, which could be application/JSON, and all the popular content types there is accept, and authorization, which would be storing our JWT token, which would basically be holding kind of like the header that will need to pass our token. Then X request wait, and then catch control. All right. Okay. And the last header we would need to set would be control our credentials, and we want to set that to true. So we're going to say access control allow credentials, and that will be set to true. All right, so having successfully set this up, we want to add this to the kernel of our application. So let's just cancel this. So basically we have set this. So let's add this to our kernel of our application so that it reflects universally. And in our kernel, this is going to be needed in the middleware and in the route middleware. So let's just call this cause. And oh, sorry. Oh boy. This is going to be from app, right? HTTP controllers. Alright, let's just go HTTP middleware cause. And of course, this is a class. And we're also going to add that to our route middleware here. And we want to call this cause. And this is also going to come from same place as this in our middleware. So let's copy that and zoom straight down here and paste that here too. And this is also a class too. And now we can save that. And now once we are sure that this is set, we can then hit over straight back to Postman and then test our API. So we say localhost API user register. And for our headers, let's set the headers. So content type and application/JSON. And now let's head over to our body. I really want raw data. We already set our headers to application/JSON. So we're going to say first name, and we can say Franklin. All right. And last name, and then Bethel. All right. Email should be raliu@gmail.com, and the password should be password. All right, password should be password. All right, so now once we're sure that everything is set, just click on the send button. And what do we get? We get a 500 internal server error, and that is because we did not import the necessary things that we actually are supposed to have imported, basically. So we're going to import that. So we're going to use Timon JWT auth contract. So Timon JWT auth contracts, and contract, and we will need JWT subject. And so now if we head back to Postman and just try to log in again, we get a 200 response of okay, and yep, invalid email or password. All right, guys. So let's just let's bring this back down a bit. No, let's just change this to register. And now let's click on send. And we get no response. I need to bring this thing down a bit. Yep, so that we can just scroll up. So we actually get no response. Let me go to my DB and see if this has been inserted. Yep, our user details have been inserted, but for some reason we get no response. Why are we getting no response? So let's get back to our auth controller, and we have first name, last name, email, password. And let me close this so that we can quickly fix this. So okay, guys, so here is what we are going to do. We are going to return this, and let me just comment this to, and now let's head back to Postman, and now let's click on register. And what happens? Let's see. All right, boom. So we get our token. So you can see here now that it returns our token and then returns the success message of true. And actually, the reason why I was not returning anything was because we did not return nothing. So we just actually called this function, but we never returned the value of this function, which was this. Okay, so we have just registered a new user now. We have raliu@gmail.com and his password is password. So let's just log in this user. Let's log in this user. So let's get rid of here and here. And now let's just click on send again. And what happens? It said first name field is required, the last name field is required. Okay, sorry, this is register. So let's change this to login. And now click on send. And here we are also, it returns for us the token and success of true. Alright guys, so that is that for the login and registration API. In the next video, we're going to be creating the whole contact manager API. And after that, we're now going to jump straight into our React application.